Yeah, so I was actually born in Mexico, in a small town, Panignicuaro, Michoacan, and my family migrated to the U.S. when I was 6 years old, and I grew up in a small town in California called Corcoran. So it's in the Central Valley, and it's a very small, like rural, really like agriculture-based town. And I went to high school there, and then after I graduated from high school, I went to university in up at Stanford, and then I came here for grad school.
Okay, so how was it like living in a rural, transitioning from Mexico to the rural town of California? Do you remember your childhood in Mexico?
From Mexico, I remember very little because I was 6 when I left, but I do have random memories, and I think the hardest was leaving behind my family, just because we were so attached, and mostly lived with my grandparents, either my dad's side or my mom's. So I think the first 3 months were the hardest, just because of that. I wasn't used to being so far away from family. Um, and other than that, growing up in the U.S., coming here, not speaking English, feeling so behind on everything was a really big challenge. So I think if it hadn't been for like my parents' support going through school, elementary school, I don't know where I'd be right now.
So do you think that made you value your education more as you grew older?
Yeah, definitely. I think it came from my parents. They brought us here and they said, we want you to have the opportunities we never had. So go to school, focus on your schoolwork. We'll take care of everything else, and just make sure you do well in school and get scholarships because that's the only way you'll be able to pay for college.
Um, so when you were transitioning from the small town you lived in to, did you know you wanted to go to such a big, like, cold school like Stanford?
Not at all. I think my goal was just to graduate from high school and go to college. But I never really thought that I could get into a school like Stanford. I think once I got to end of middle school, beginning of high school, and my teachers and counselors just were really supportive of me, and they believed in me. They when they saw a scholarship application, they would reach out to me and tell me, "Hey, Nancy, you should apply to this or to that." When it came time to apply to schools like colleges, my counselor gave me the application. He said, I'll write you a recommendation letter. And I think if I had not had that support, I don't think I would have applied, or like even I didn't think I was going to get in. So I was like, it's worth a try. All they can say is no, so I'm just going to apply. And I got lucky.
So once you were actually there, could you describe to us like your feelings about being undocumented in such an elite school?
Well, the thing with my case, I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones, just because I was undocumented, but for 10 years. And those 10 years were from like when I first arrived, when I was 6, all the way to sophomore year of high school. So my case, when it came down to applying for schools, I actually had a social security number, and I didn't have to worry about all that. So I feel super, super lucky and blessed, that I was able to do that. But that's what made me so passionate about the DREAM Act work that's going on now, because I realized that there are so many students who have to struggle even more than I did, to get financial aid for college, to apply to any university. And I don't think it's fair, there's so much talent, so much potential that's just going to waste, and I hate to see that.
Yeah. So when did you start first getting involved in the Dream Act?
That was actually right before I moved out here to New York for my master's program. It was, I think, this June 2009, because I think it was online, about a mock graduation that was going to happen in Washington, D.C., where all the dreamers were wearing caps and gowns, and they had their posters, and they were lobbying up in front of the White House. And I heard about it, and I thought it was really great that this was going on, so I looked for any action that could be taking place, around where my parents lived, because at the time I was back in Corcoran, and there was nothing going on in Fresno, nothing going on. I think LA was the closest action that they were going to have that day. And so I think just hearing that, I was really, really frustrated, just thinking of like demographics, like such a small rural town where so many of us were either, undocumented or recent immigrants, and nothing going on. I just felt super sad and like just helpless, or I thought I needed to do something. And when I heard that I got into grad school here, I decided that once I moved out here, I would be really active with the organizations here. So that's what I did. Like I researched the group. Luckily, I found the New York State Youth Leadership Council, and I started getting involved with them.
That's great. So, could you describe, was the immigrant community in your town really welcoming? Like, do you feel like there were things that made you guys feel comfortable being in a place that was so new? Like,
in Corcoran?
Yeah.
I think it felt comfortable and like home because of our friends and family who already lived there, and because we were all going through similar situations, like I said, whether it was that we were undocumented or that we were recent immigrants or our parents were farm workers. But outside of us in our community, the people who didn't relate to us, it wasn't very welcoming. Like I never told anybody I was undocumented, I think, until after I had my residency, because it never came up in conversations. It was nothing that was really talked about, And I'm sure there were a lot of students there who were in the same situation I was. We just didn't have that kind of support group, I guess, that happens now here with like the Dreamers and just all the national movements and marches and protests and like support groups they have.
So do you feel like when you moved from home to college, how was that kind of culture shock, that change in atmosphere?
Ooh, it was intense. At first, I really enjoyed my first year at Stanford. It was like the complete opposite of my high school in the sense that people were really interested in learning and just being part of, academia. And in my high school, I feel like, unfortunately, a lot of people just didn't have plans for after high school. It was like, well, if I graduate, then I'll just go work the fields or something, And so once I got to Stanford, the first year was great. I was like, oh my God, all these people around me want to learn and they're into the same things I am. So it was a great feeling. But I think when the culture shock and the everything else shock hit was sophomore year. Just I realized, I felt super behind in terms of my academics. Like even though I had taken, the highest level courses they offered in my high school, it didn't compare to what the level that Stanford had. So I always felt like I was in a constant, I have to play catch up to be at the same level as my classmates, and that was really hard. And then like you mentioned, the culture shock, I remember one incident when we were sitting in like a small discussion session, probably something like this, and we were reading a book that had something about the farm workers in Fresno, which was just so, I was like, well, ironic for me. And one girl in the class, we read a passage, like a description of what it was like for them to work like a day work, in the fields. And one of the girls opened the book and was like, oh my God, I can't believe these people live this way. And all I could do at the moment was like look at her, and I didn't know if I should laugh, cry, or do what. So I just stayed silent. Like, yeah, it was just that shocking to me also, but at the same time it was like painful, to be around people who I couldn't relate to and they couldn't relate to me. But I think later I learned, that was just a great learning experience for everybody when we were able to share like the different backgrounds we come from and just how the two different worlds we live in.
So what did you study while you were at Stanford?
At Stanford, I tried everything, I think, and ended up doing German studies. So it was like a mix of like language, culture, history, because I spent a year abroad. I went abroad, I think it was the spring of my sophomore year, and to Berlin, and I just really liked it so much. I ended up staying there, doing internships, teaching English at an elementary school, and it was just such a great experience. When I returned, I was like, I am going to change my major, and I did. So that's what I studied.
So once you got here, how did you said that you were really passionate about starting to advocate for the Dream Act when you got to New York City, so how did you start with that?
So I found online the website to the New York State Youth Leadership Council, and I just went to one of their meetings, and that's how I started. So we would, first get together and discuss like action plans, or meet again to work on posters for a rally or protest. And I think little by little, I just try to get as involved as I could. I think it's really difficult to balance that with graduate school, just because I feel we're so overwhelmed with readings and papers to write and everything. And sometimes my biggest conflict was our meetings were always Wednesday evenings, and I always had class Wednesday evenings, so it was also like playing catch up with friends, being like, oh, what happened at the meeting, what can I go some other day and help with this. But now I think I'm trying to get even more involved, because the New York State Dream Act is really getting a lot of momentum right now, so we're trying to work really hard and hopefully get it passed in June.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel like the fact that you kind of had this opportunity to be even playing catch up between your education and advocating motivated you even more? And like, how did you try to inspire other people you were working with who were going through the struggle of, paying for education and being undocumented?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think being active and advocating and just being outside of the Columbia community really helps me, because I can relate to, I think, people outside of the Columbia community more than I can relate to the general Columbia students. And in terms of motivation, I think when I moved out here and started getting active about the DREAM Act, I realized, they were having this huge campaign about sharing their stories and coming out of the shadows. And for me, it was like, well, I'm not undocumented anymore, but I think it's really important for others to know that the kind of potential that we're missing out on, and the talent, like the human capital, by not giving undocumented students a green card or a path to citizenship. And so that's why I decided to start sharing my story of I was undocumented before, but now, but I got lucky. I was one of the lucky ones and was able to, do so much, just because I was given the opportunity that all these students should have. So in that sense, I think it's, sharing my story and just being able to support anybody who reaches out to me, or if I find out somebody who I can help, I more than gladly would love to.